my name is Anna Barker, and all of you know me as the person who hyperventilates about thick tomes. And so I've been doing it since 2020. And we are, at this point, working our way through all of the great novels of Dostoevsky that were published after his years of Siberian exile. So last fall, we read Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment. And the preliminary reading included Turgenev's Fathers and Sons and Chernyshevsky, What is to be Done, as the novels Dostoevsky was responding to in Notes from Underground, and then Crime and Punishment as the evolution of his post-Siberia thinking. And an evolution of many of the concepts that he started discussing in Notes from Underground. And this fall, we're discussing The Idiot. And some of you finished it, and you're in despair. Your soul's hurt. You are troubled by this novel. And this is the most troubling novel of Dostoevsky. This is where Dostoevsky is the most raw, the most unsettled and unsettling. And readers have been pondering this novel ever since its publication and have been puzzled by just how unsettled Dostoevsky is in this novel. And do you remember what I kept saying in my notes that everything that we are going to see happen at the end of this novel will be will be painful, unresolved. And in order to come to terms with what is happening to Dostoevsky, and in order to fully understand the evolution of his philosophical, theological, and historical thinking, we need to get to the last page of Brothers Karamazov. That's where everything is resolved. But until we get to the last page of Brothers Karamazov, we have to go along on this journey of the five great novels. And I have all of them still in that stack right there next to my little Journal Napoleon. So Notes from Underground is the foundational text, and then Crime and Punishment after that. I pulled The Idiot off the shelf, so it's right here, right now. And this is the cover that every edition of The Idiot should have, because this is the painting that inspired the novel. And then after that comes Demons. And we're reading Demons next fall. So prepare for even more unsettling narratives. But Demons is a political novel. It is an ideological novel, and also it is Dostoevsky's most hilarious novel. So if you were chuckling and sometimes even laughing out loud in The Idiot, expect more of that. And you probably noticed that Dostoevsky got funnier as he was writing The Idiot. I mean, some of the final chapters are just laugh out loud funny, but also completely destabilizing, the ending of the novel, especially. So Demons will have more of everything, plus many, many references to Shakespeare, which I am really excited to share with you. And then we will dedicate all of 27 to Dostoevsky with spring reading of The Adolescent, novel that is less known. It's the penultimate novel of Dostoevsky. And then in the fall of 2027, we will work through Brothers Karamazov one more time, having acquired all the wisdom necessary to appreciate it in the context of the Great Five. So Notes from Underground is foundation, and then Crime and Punishment, Idiot, Demons, Adolescent, Brothers Karamazov. In addition to these novels, I'm asking you to do the impossible, which is to read some of the shorter works. And before we read the Demons, we'll probably work on The Double, which is a phenomenal novel. Just like this fall, before reading The Idiot, we read White Nights. The Double is another pre-Siberia novel of Dostoevsky, just like The White Nights. And Demons is a reworking of all of the concepts that Dostoevsky developed in The Double, because you already noticed so much doubling of characters in The Idiot. Prince Mushkin and Rogozhin, obviously, but also Prince Mushkin and Ippolit, Aglaya and Nastasia Filipovna. So that doubling is going to be supercharged in Demons, and the characters that we'll encounter there. If you think Svidrigailov in Crime and Punishment was troubling character. If you think Rogozhin is a troubling character, just wait till you encounter Pyotr Verkhovensky and especially Nikolai Stavrogin in Demons. So we are on a journey. we are we are working our way through Dostoevsky's troubled mind. And it's fascinating that I kept stressing over and over again from the very beginning when we started discussing The Idiot in September, all the way to my last comment from a couple of days ago, to what extent The Idiot is a novel of exile. And Dostoevsky can't stay in Russia because of financial difficulties and family problems. He is newly married. He is very happy. He should be very happy. He finally married his muse, the love of his life, Anna Grigorievna Snitkina, who helped him publish The Gambler. And we talked about that in my earlier Zoom, October Zoom on the inception of The Idiot. But he is very much though troubled. And I'm going to perhaps share my images from my PowerPoint now, and then we'll go into a deeper discussion of The Idiots. So yes, let's begin one more time with Notes from Underground, which is the foundational text for the Great Five. And we discussed already the fact that the abolition of serfdom was the political event that defined everything that was written in the aftermath of 1861. So Anna Karenina is definitely a novel that deals with the complexities of land reforms, but you can see the reverberations of that in a novel like The Idiot. And of course, the two writers that tried to conceptualize Russian political and philosophical thought in the aftermath of the abolition of serfdom were Turgenev in His Fathers and Sons and Chernyshevsky in What Is to Be Done. And then Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is a response to both. And you can see to what extent Dostoevsky's ideas about human nature and how human beings do things out of spite. Human beings do things that are not rational. Human beings attempt to assert themselves, but not necessarily in ways that are productive and conducive towards progress in their lives. And you can see these ideas that Dostoevsky already developed in Notes from Underground definitely explode in The Idiot. Nastasia Filipovna does things out of spite. And we actually find out from at the very beginning of the novel that when she shows up and confronts Totsky, her seducer, she just says, I want to do things because I'm spiteful and I am a wicked woman. You see how those ideas of Nastasia Filipovna will eventually reverberate in Brothers Karamazov. And those of you who read Brothers Karamazov with me before, you can hear everything that Nastasia Filipovna says in a character like Grushenka Svetlova. So Dostoevsky has issue with this certainty that comes from Western philosophy, Western post-Enlightenment certainty in human progress. And he counters this idea of firm belief in human progress with example after example of human beings who do not make progress in their lives. Just think of Ganka Ivolgin. He is such a bewildering character. He's attractive, he's educated, he has drive, but he sabotages himself every step of the way. And then, of course, Dostoevsky gives us that devastating chapter where he discusses the Ivolgin family. You know, they are educated enough and they are respectable enough and they could be better off, but they self-sabotage. His father is, of course, a saboteur on steroids. General Ivolgin is the comic relief of the novel. But at the same time, you see that this drive towards eternal progress does not correlate with human inclinations. And General Ivolgin sabotages himself all the time, but so does Ganka, and he shouldn't. And at the end of the novel, we sort of feel that Aglaya, once again, she runs to the Ivolgin household after a confrontation with Nastasia Filipovna. She would like to reconnect with Ganka, but he misses his chance to reach her yet again. And it's so frustrating to us. And I noticed all of your comments, and some of you were saying, the characters are constantly defying my expectations of what they're going to do. And that's the beauty of The Idiot. We never arrive at a moment where we feel like, wow, we've reached a place of equilibrium. The characters just sort of like understood each other finally. The characters are constantly misunderstanding and misspeaking. They're walking past each other. And that is so counterintuitive for readers who are um, attuned to Western novels. I mean, in this sense, Dostoevsky is closer to Balzac than any other writer. And the novels that are written at this time period, starting with Jane Austen in the early 19th century and all the way to Dickens, we would like to have resolutions. We would like to have a novel that concludes with some kind of equilibrium accomplished, but it's not that. And it's not accidental that at the end of the novel, Myshkin sees a copy of Madame Bovary of Flaubert opened in Nastasia Filipovna's apartment. And one of the readers actually messaged me privately and said, "Oh, how I wish to know what page it was open on." And Myshkin is the only one. Myshkin is the only character in the novel who knows what was the page in Madame Bovary where Nastasia Filipovna left us. So this drive towards progress, towards resolution, towards um, self-definition is not what Dostoevsky accomplishes in this novel. And that's why we as readers are so frustrated. So this eternal progress, and you can see the echoes of the Crystal Palace, which Dostoevsky lambasts in Notes from Underground, expressed in Lebedev's definition of what progress is through this long soliloquy about trains, how they make material life more comfortable, but is that enough for human beings who are constantly striving towards some kind of metaphysical, spiritual transcendence? And Dostoevsky just basically says, well, yes, human beings think that we achieved progress was like spectacular material advancements. And note that Dostoevsky is also talking about materialist ideologies like socialism and communism, which definitely adhere to the notion of material progress. But Dostoevsky says, well, no, human beings are constantly trapped in this self-delusional notion of advancement, and he sees the Crystal Palace built for the World Exhibition in London in the 1850s as yet another iteration of the Tower of Babel. Human beings are constantly striving to reach beyond what is accessible to them in the empirical world. And Dostoevsky's notion of the Tower of Babel is, well, yes, human beings wanted to reach higher. They wanted to reach all the way to God, but not to be closer to God, not to achieve this incredible understanding and transcendence in the here and now, but to seize God and bring God down to our level. You can see when Nietzsche will be reading Dostoevsky's novels, including Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, and Idiot, and he will come to his own conclusions about the death of God. But Dostoevsky is not advocating the death of God. He is stating the obvious that human beings are going through yet another iteration of this drive for perfection that is ultimately self-destructive. And we talked about the fact that as he's writing Notes from Underground, his wife dies. And of course, she was suffering from tuberculosis. So now we can add the next layer of interpretation of the idiot because we have Ippolit Terentiev, the teenager who is dying from tuberculosis in the novel. And there's a profoundness to his statements, but also incredible bitterness. And so Dostoevsky, there are other characters in 19th century literature who are dealing with tuberculosis or consumption, as the case may be. And one of the biggest inspirations for Dostoevsky is, of course, Alexander Dumas' Lady of the Camellias, where the main character is dying of tuberculosis. She was, of course, the inspiration for Violetta in Verdi's La Traviata. And the whole notion of this woman who is associated with flowers is very much, though, brought into the novel, especially in part one, where Totski is asked to reveal his most despicable deed. And with Nastasia Filipovna sitting in front of him and smoothing the beautiful lace on her sleeves in disgust. He tells the story of how he bought all the camellias and gave them to a woman who was courted by his friend, and to what extent that destabilized his friend to the point of loss of reason, and then he goes to the Crimean War and dies. So Totsky creates this lie, and the lie is, of course, imported from the Alexander Dumas novel, The Lady of the Camellias. So um, consumption is something that we see in the operatic world often in 19th century opera, because we also have La Boheme, where Mimi has consumption. So Hippolyte Terentiev definitely becomes a character who is attuned to some of the other themes in the novel, such as um, death by execution or termination of life that is premature. And Hippolyte Terentiev knows that he is dying young. And that gives this incredible weight and prescience to his statements, but also at the same time, tremendous bitterness. And he keeps asking this question, well, fine, I was dying in St. Petersburg and I was looking at this wall, and it really disturbed me to stare at this wall as I was contemplating a young death. So you tell me to come here to Pavlovsk and be among friends and to die among trees. Well, I still have to die, and I will be the one doing the dying. So Hippolyte, Hippolyte's narratives fit into the broader narrative of executions and early deaths. And of course, Dostoevsky is describing, every time he describes men confronted with a termination of life that is premature, with his own experiences of near death because of the sentence of death by firing squad that he received in his late 20s. So Hippolyte definitely speaks to Dostoevsky's own thoughts about what it means to know that you're not going to fulfill a lifetime of growth, a lifetime of aspirations. And does it make your life more meaningful? And does it make your life more precious to understand that you are not going to fulfill your potential? And Dostoevsky says that, well, of course, he doesn't bring up himself as an example, but when Myshkin, who has Dostoevsky's illness, epilepsy, keeps bringing up these executions, and the Panchin sisters ask him, but this man who was given a second chance, did he utilize it? And Dostoevsky says no. He still wasted so much of his life. So Hippolyte Terentiev is definitely one of the speakers for this idea of young death and wasted life. And then Dostoevsky, of course, is writing this novel abroad, but this is not his first trip abroad. He has taken two trips to the West before he travels was Anna Grigorievna, his new second wife. And with Crime and Punishment, he already explores all of these ideas of intellectual discontent, ideological discontent in Crime and Punishment, and the ideas of isms invading Russian political thinking and gnawing at Russian philosophical and theological development, already explored in Crime and Punishment, but you see these ideas just explode in The Idiot, especially in the pre-second epileptic fit soliloquy of Myshkin, which is so disturbing, so destabilizing, and all of those ideas that were just hinted at throughout the novel are all of a sudden come into focus in this pre-breaking of the vase soliloquy of Myshkin, and we can discuss this in a little more detail at the end of my PowerPoint. So we talked about the fact that Crime and Punishment was written in St. Petersburg. And when we are reading Crime and Punishment, we are actually walking through the streets of St. Petersburg. We have the sense of physical presence of the author and the character on location. Uh, and this is the plaque on the building where Dostoevsky lived when he was writing Crime and Punishment. So we are walking through St. Petersburg. The novel begins on this bridge, Kakushkin Most, and we can literally retrace the steps of all the characters through St. Petersburg with Crime and Punishment. And there is the sign, the location. I mean, you can do a St. Petersburg Crime and Punishment tour when you are visiting. The Gambler, of course, is the novel that is set abroad. So Dostoevsky is combining these two locations in The Idiot. We have characters who have lived abroad, right? Myshkin, who's constantly referring to Switzerland. Note how many references there are in The Idiot for the Panchin family wanting to go abroad, and then they postpone, and there is a wedding planned, and then they postpone again, and then the wedding is postponed so that the two weddings of the two sisters would be combined, and then Aglaya's wedding doesn't happen, and then they eventually go abroad, and the novel ends with the characters being abroad one more time. So Crime and Punishment and The Gambler were written simultaneously in 1866. Crime and Punishment is definitely a St. Petersburg novel. The Gambler is definitely a Western Europe novel. And Dostoevsky combines these two locations in The Idiot. And then Anna Grigorievna Snitkina, as you well know from my previous Zooms, was the one who was hired as the stenographer, and Dostoevsky dictated The Gambler to her. And that's how they met the November 1, 1866 publishing deadline. What happens as a consequence of their work together is that The Idiot, Demons, The Adolescent, and Brothers Karamazov were written the same way as The Gambler. Dostoevsky dictated those four novels to Anna Grigorievna. He was almost done writing Crime and Punishment when he met her, and the jubilant, ecstatic ending of Crime and Punishment is an extension of Dostoevsky's period of incredible transcendent love for this young woman who was willing to share her life with him. He was 14, 16 years older than Anna Grigorievna, and she definitely knew that she was marrying a man who is troubled. And the first 5 years of their marriage, the years during which Dostoevsky wrote The Idiot, were in so many ways catastrophic. They had to live abroad because of his severe debts in Russia. He would have been sent to a debtor's prison. And I always find it so amusing that the two locations where they lived, Switzerland and Florence, were cheaper for them than living in Russia. And so living in Geneva, Vevey, and Florence was the best option for a couple that had absolutely no money. And those are the three locations where The Idiot was written. And we talked about the fact that there's a wonderful film, and some of you actually watched the film, so I'm very, very pleased. 26 Days in the Life of Dostoevsky, about the writing of The Gambler. So he would come up with plot developments for Idiot, Demons, Adolescent, and Brothers Karamazov. He would come up with plot developments in the middle of the night. His best thinking was done at night. And then in the afternoon, they would get together and he would dictate the novel to her. And note all of the spectacular, everyone is in the same room scenes, and the incredible, Bakhtin called it the heteroglossia of Dostoevsky, the multi-voicedness of Dostoevsky, where all of these characters are in the same room, and Dostoevsky does it over and over and over again in The Idiot. He is loving it. He's getting really good at it. Just you wait till you see these same scenes even more spectacularly zany in Demons. But can you imagine Anna Grigorievna being on the receiving end of Dostoevsky doing all the voices for all the characters during these, let's throw everyone together in one room and let it all explode? So can you imagine this young woman being on the receiving end of Dostoevsky dictating all of these scenes to her? Can you imagine her writing down the scene of the breaking of the Chinese vase? And you can see that he is loving that scene. He describes all of these characters with so much delicious sarcasm. It's just dripping with the most incredibly precious characteristics of all of these characters. And then she would write everything down stenographically and then provide the next day the Russian equivalent, all the words written out to Dostoevsky. Then he would do the edits based on what she provided him with, and then come up with the next scene for the next day's dictation. So The Idiot was written the same way as The Gambler. Katkov publishes The Idiot. So The Idiot is published in the Russian Messenger, serialized, just like Crime and Punishment, and just like Demons, and just like Brothers Karamazov. The only one that is not published in the Russian Messenger of the Great Five is The Adolescent, because Katkov already gave Tolstoy the go-ahead to publish Anna Karenina and the Russian Messenger. And remember, I told you that Katkov was publishing simultaneously in the same issues of the Russian Messenger, War and Peace and Crime and Punishment. And so Katkov didn't want to do that again with Tolstoy and Dostoevsky on the same pages because they were selling such huge amounts of books that Katkov said no to the adolescent because he already said yes to Anna Karenina. But then Brothers Karamazov, so Crime and Punishment, Idiot, Demons, and Brothers Karamazov were all published in Ruski Vestnik, or the Russian Messenger. And here are the titles of the Russian Messenger publications. So we come to the Idiot. It's fascinating that these translations by Richard Pavier and Larisa Volokhovskaya, did you notice that they all have a cross-like design on the cover? And I really feel that of all the Dostoevsky novels should have cross-like designs on their covers because all of them are deeply spiritual, deeply metaphysical, deeply theological novels. And Dostoevsky's discussion of the differences between Russian Christianity and Western Christianity, especially Catholicism, are stunning, breathtaking. And you probably noticed that our next reading is in the spring is the Federalist Papers, and I'm so excited about it. But what I want to do, the 250th anniversary of the Republic is coming right up, and that is my contribution to the festivities. But what I want to do is place the American Revolution into the context of 300 years of revolutions. And if you read my post, I mentioned that in the next 2.5 months, instead of posting and requiring any reading, I will be posting all the books that I am reading to prepare myself for this. And so far, I read 3 books on the 17th century revolutionary upheavals in England, The Blazing World, biography of Cromwell, and just finishing the biography of Milton. And if we are destabilized by Dostoevsky's ideas about Catholicism, you have no idea how bad it was in England in the 17th century. The fights between Catholics and Protestants, and then Protestants and Protestants, were just so brutal, so vile, so self-defeating. I'm destabilized by the English 17th century. So I have the perfect antidote for my gloom after finishing The Idiot, the English 17th century. Nothing more depressing that I've ever encountered. So more in my lists of books that I will be reading in the next 2.5 months. So so yes, if Crime and Punishment is a St. Petersburg novel and we can sense St. Petersburg in it, we can walk with the characters through St. Petersburg. The Idiot is enigmatic. The image of St. Petersburg is distant in the novel because it's almost allegorical, because Dostoevsky is writing abroad while pining for the city that is of the essence of Dostoevsky. And I keep stressing that Dostoevsky was born in Moscow, but is forever associated with St. Petersburg, with even his first novel, Poor Folk, Double, White Nights, The Insulted and the Injured, Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, Idiot, Adolescent are all set in St. Petersburg. So he is a great singer of St. Petersburg, just like Gogol, just like Pushkin. But in the Idiot, the city is distant. So this beautiful city that is so real. So this is the view that Raskolnikov has when he's standing on the bridge and he's contemplating St. Petersburg, and he comes to this irreversible decision inside himself. And of course, he does that on a bridge while crossing the waters. So this irreversible decision made in this location that is between places, that St. Petersburg is missing in the Idiot. And what we and Pavlovsk, of course, Pavlovsk is a huge. It's fascinating. Those of you who live in Iowa City, I screened the Kurosawa film in at Film Scene, a local theater on Tuesday, and it's amazing because the entire film of Kurosawa, which left everyone speechless. I spoke to an audience after the film that was completely in shock. And it's an incredibly accurate adaptation of The Idiot. But the entire film is set in the dead of a Japanese winter in 1951, and the snow is just falling and falling and falling throughout the film. And so to just revive everyone from the shock of the film, I said, well, isn't this hilarious that, people just assume that all Russian novels are set in the dead of winter and there's lots and lots of snow. But that is not the case with The Idiot. It's set in June. The entire novel, the majority of the novel, takes place in June during White Nights, and that becomes very important for Hippolyte's confession. Because remember, he falls asleep and then he wakes up in panic and he says, did I miss it? And it's midnight. And what he was worried about is that he missed the sunrise. And there's maybe 15, 20 minutes of darkishness in Russia in mid-June. So Dostoevsky is longing for white nights. I mean, this is the man who is writing this novel in Geneva and Vevey, and the last section in Florence. And he is longing for white nights. He is longing for June in Russia. And that's why, that is partly the reason why I wanted to read White Nights with you about the dreamer and Nastinka before starting The Idiot, because that novel is also set during White Nights. But Dostoevsky writes that while in St. Petersburg. Here, there's a longing for St. Petersburg, there's a longing for Pavlovsk, there's a longing for White Nights, and there's the sense of distance from it all. It becomes just symbolic in The Idiot. So here are a few more images of Pavlovsk Park, and it's amazing. All of these characters just sort of meander through the Pavlovsk Park continuously. They meet on benches, they bump into each other. There are teenagers who appear in the middle of a park with hedgehogs in baskets, and then the hedgehogs, the provenance of the hedgehog is renegotiated, and the hedgehog changes hands, but yet again travels with the teenagers as a peace offering to Myshkin. So you can just see all of these scenes taking place in this beautiful, beautiful park, the Pavlovsk Park. And I posted images of the Boboli Gardens in Florence. Dostoevsky and Anna Grigorievna walked through the Boboli Gardens every day, weather permitting, because they lived in Florence across the street from Palazzo Pitti, and the Boboli Gardens are behind the palace. And I went to the gardens and I strolled through the gardens this past summer, the Boboli Gardens, asking myself, what is the significance of this park? And then I found two green metal chairs sitting next to each other, and I posted that image as one of my last posts for my idiot commentary. And I just imagined Dostoevsky and Anna Grigorievna sitting in those two chairs in Florence at the Boboli Gardens, closing their eyes and pretending that they're at Pavlovsk. And the longing for Russia, for the language and the culture that produced Dostoevsky. The entire novel is infused with this longing. So when you see these gorgeous descriptions of St. Petersburg, gorgeous descriptions of Pavlovsk, they're so symbolic of the longing that Dostoevsky was experiencing as he was writing this novel abroad. Here's another beautiful image of Pavlovsk. And then many of the illustrations that I was giving throughout this reading are from this edition of The Idiot. The photos, so all of the illustrations, sometimes they were a little off because I made all of the photos of the illustrations from a book that belongs to the University of Iowa. It's in special collections, and all of the illustrations are by Fritz Eichenberg. So we are very lucky to have the Grade 5 all illustrated by Fritz Eichenberg. And when I put together the Dostoevsky at 200 exhibition in 2021, those books were in the vitrine dedicated to the Grade 5. And I called that section of the exhibition The Prophet, because they're often considered to be the prophetic books of Dostoevsky. I love the illustration from the front of the novel, from the title page, because you can see the doubling, right? And the doubling of Dostoevsky, like Dostoevsky whispering to Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is in dialogue with himself. Dostoevsky is split into the Dostoevsky who is writing and Dostoevsky who is in metaphysical despair, pouring that metaphysical despair onto the pages of The Idiot, with, of course, an icon in the background. Note the icon in the background will be so important in Demons. There will be a character who has lost faith and does not light the lamp underneath the icon, as is traditional in Russian homes. But there will be a moment in Demons when Dostoevsky will just mention in passing that the light was lit under the icon. And that, I mean, that gives me goosebumps because you realize that this character is all of a sudden in so much trouble spiritually. Um, Doubling, note how many times characters say in The Idiot that they thought they saw Rogozhin looking at them. Both Mishkin and Ippolit do that. And this illustration portrays this eerie horror of a character being watched that occurs over and over and over again in The Idiot. Those of you who read Crime and Punishment with me, you know to what extent Rogozhin is a development of the character of Svidrigailov, who lurks throughout the novel. And at one point, Raskolnikov wakes up thinking that somebody is watching him. And then when he comes to full conscience after awakening, Svidrigailov is sitting right next to him. So Ippolit says that I think I saw Rogozhin in my room. I think he was there. During the funeral of General Ivalgin, Mishkin asks Kolya, did I just see Rogozhin? And Kolya says, yes, he was here. When Mishkin is going to the train station, he sees these eyes staring at him. And then he realizes they are Rogozhin's eyes. And then he asks Rogozhin, were you there? And Rogozhin never answers. So Rogozhin ends up being this darkness, primal darkness that is always lurking in the background. Note he shows up at funerals because funerals are fascinating for the quintessence of primal darkness. He shows up and Mushkin sees these eyes just before Rogozhin tries to murder him with that same garden knife that is mentioned over and over and over again. Now you appreciate the foreshadowing of the novel because one of the first times when Nastasia Filipovna mentions Rogozhin, she says, yeah, maybe I want to be with him. And Myshkin says, but you would be going to certain death. And Nastasia Filipovna says, so what? Maybe I want certain death. And then in part two, when they're discussing Holbein's Christ, and there's this long, long, long narrative about faith and faithlessness and atheism, and Myshkin not being able to answer the simplest question that Rogozhin asks him, do you believe in God? Myshkin never gives that answer. In that chapter, Myshkin notices that there's a new garden knife sitting inside a book. And Myshkin asks Rogozhin, you have a garden knife in your book. And Rogozhin says, what? I can't have a garden knife in my book? And Myshkin says, well, so what do you do with it? Do you cut the pages? And Rogozhin says, so what? Maybe I cut the pages. And Myshkin says, but this knife is brand new. And Rogozhin says, what? I can't buy a new knife. So that conversation, the Chekhov statement, if there's a gun on the set, it must fire. Chekhov was born in 1860. He would have been a child when this novel is written. We have a knife that is so prominent throughout the novel, first as a bookmark, then as the weapon that Rogozhin is using in this attempted murder of Myshkin. But as he is trying to stab Myshkin, Myshkin starts experiencing his first epileptic fit. So it has such a horrific reaction he reacts so horrifically to this attempted murder. And then, of course, the second epileptic fit happens during the vase breaking scene, and that is also foreshadowed, right? I mean, Aglaya literally tells him, Mama has a Chinese vase, and you shouldn't break it. And Myshkin, like, consciously keeps saying to himself, I must sit as far away from the vase as possible. And he does. And I mean, we are laughing out loud because this is so hilarious. I mean, how often have we gone to, fussy spaces where people have warned us, just, stay away from the window, stay away from the mirror, stay away from the vitrine, stay away from, grandmother's prized china. And you are so self-conscious about it that you end up breaking one of the cups and you feel so awful and you were warned. But Myshkin is definitely warned. He stays as far away from the vase as possible. And then guess what? It shatters. So what else? There's also, so this is the Russian film, The Idiot. It's fabulous. And in the scene, you can see Rogozhin offering Nastasia Filipovna all that money that she throws in the fireplace. And this is the film that I screened at Film Scene, and I can't recommend it enough. The cast is absolute perfection. Every single character, Aglaya, so this is Aglaya and Myshkin, but Aglaya, Anastasia Filipovna, Myshkin, and Ganka are superbly cast. Ragozhin is unsurpassable. And I don't know the name of the Japanese actors, but the actor who plays Ragozhin, it's eerie, it's uncanny. You are destabilized by the way he internalized Ragozhin so perfectly. And he's alluring. He is seductive. He is attractive. And that is the horror and the staggering beauty of Dostoevsky's demonic characters. We are seduced by them. We find them attractive. And it is a catastrophe for us as readers because we would like to say, well, I'm above all that. I understand how letting evil into your life is not a good idea. And I always tell my students when I teach these novels that we assume that when darkness approaches us, it will have horns and a tail, and it will look like the proverbial devil from Renaissance frescoes. But I always tell my students, actually, we won't know because this darkness that enters our life is going to be the most exciting thing that will ever happen to us. And we will not be able to say no. And for us to say no would require such terrific act of willpower and understanding and introspection that we may not be prepared at the moment of this dark possession that enters our lives. And Ragozhin, I mean, his name is Parfen Ragozhin, so rog in Russian is horn, and Ragozha is animal skin. But his first name, Parfen, comes from the Greek language, just like Aglaya comes from the Greek, and it means light. Ragozhin's name, Parfen, comes from the word Parthenos. So I described this, I explained this already. So the Parthenon in Athens is called the Parthenon because it's the temple of the virgin goddess Athena. And Parthenos means virginal, primal. So Dostoevsky gives this name to this character of darkness, but he explains to us through his name, he points us in towards this understanding of this character as the original darkness, the primal darkness, the darkness that is there to begin with. And in so many ways, Ragozhin serves as an observer of all of these characters trying to skirt around darkness, but returning to it because it's so attractive and so alluring. Notice that when the bench scenes happens, he is somewhere in the background. He's always accompanying Nastasia Filipovna when she's trying to make these fateful decisions, but at the same time, he stays in the background because he wants to observe characters behaving badly. It thrills him. It gives him this incredible titillation to see how people choose darkness when light is available to them. And in that final confrontation, the duel between the two women, Aglaya and Nastasia Filipovna, we have Parfen representing primal darkness and Aglaya being the slight. But so many characters, so many readers were actually disappointed with Aglaya because they're saying, but she's just as manipulative as Nastasia Filipovna. And this scene in the film is stunning. It is absolutely stunning. It leaves you speechless. Um, but Anastasia Filipovna actually says to Ragozhin, I don't like her as much as I thought I would like her. And like after meeting her in person. And Ragozhin tells her, maybe you shouldn't meet her because you like her too much. You consider her to be the ideal. And Nastasia says, no, no, I want to talk to her. And so she's disappointed with Aglaya because when we meet human beings in person, they appear to be so different from the human beings that we create in our minds. And Dostoevsky knows that all too well. And of course, this painting. So I'll show some of the images that I already posted throughout the fall. But Dostoevsky sees this painting in Basel as they are traveling from Dresden to Switzerland. He wanted to see this painting. He came to Basel specifically to see this painting. And Anna Grigorievna uh, tells us in her diaries that she left Fyodor Mikhailovich in front of the painting, and she left to look at other art, but she came back because he was still in front of this painting, and she was worried that he'll have an epileptic fit just looking at it. He actually climbs on a chair in the museum to look closer at this painting, and he says to her, "You can lose faith looking at this painting." And that's exactly what Mushkin says to Rogozhin when he sees a copy of the painting in Rogozhin's dark and gloomy house. It's fascinating that the novel begins with the description of this painting, and the novel ends with a reenactment of this painting, because the lifeless corpse that we see is prostrate. And Rogozhin says, maybe we should bring flowers because the smell is going to appear. So it's fascinating how the smell of corruption is what Dostoevsky associates with this painting. Christ is dead, and resurrection is uncertain. And Nastasia Filipovna's name, in that sense, is so symbolic because Nastasia is the shorter version of Anastasia, which is also Greek, and that's the word for resurrection. And her last name, Barashova, comes from the word for lamb. It's the resurrection of the lamb. Is the resurrection possible? Nastasia Filipovna is human. So is Mushkin. He cannot save Nastasia Filipovna. He cannot save other human beings because he's all too human. And so Dostoevsky's contemplation on the divinity of Christ, on the essence of Christianity, and to what extent human beings who have a hard time distinguishing between pity and love, love and compassion, compassion and understanding, understanding and love. They are not divine. Human beings are not divine, and therein lies our greatest tragedy. So yes, this painting is reenacted at the end of the novel. It's fascinating that the odor of corruption is going to be such a huge part of Brothers Karamazov, because when Father Zosima dies, everyone notices that the body smells. And then we have a character, Smerdyakov, whose name in Russian means the stinky one, as the child of Stinky Lizaveta, the woman who was wronged in the novel and whose um, sexual assault destabilizes the community continuously. So, in that sense, Nastasia Filipovna and the smell of the corruption of her body will be revisited again in Stinky Lizaveta, another woman who was wronged by a man. And to what extent both Nastasia Filipovna being wronged and Stinky Lizaveta being wronged becomes the crucial element of the novel and becomes that catastrophe that destroys the community all around. So I will just show you the images of how you get to this painting. And the city of Basel is charming, um, beautiful, calm, peaceful, and very, very Western. And that is the most important thing that we need to note about the setting where Dostoevsky writes the novel. He writes this novel in Western Europe, and it doesn't look anything like Russia. So this is the walk towards the museum where the Holbein Christ is housed. Erasmus was a person associated with Basel. This is the house where he lived. And of course, Hans Holbein paints a portrait of Erasmus. So we see that painting in the art museum in Basel as well. And Hans Holbein is associated with Basel. So you literally go to the holiest shrine of Hans Holbein when you visit his artwork in Basel at the art museum. And you've seen all of these images at the start of my commentary on The Idiot. And you walk closer and closer. And I actually sat on this bench, and the guard in the museum, I was the only person there. It was almost closing time. And the guard actually came up to me and he said, "Would you like me to take your picture?" looking at that painting. And I said, "Yes, please, that would be amazing." So he did. And after that, they end up in Geneva. So this is Lake Geneva. You can just see Fyodor Mikhailovich and Anna Grigorievna walking along the promenade along Lake Geneva in Geneva. And that's on the western side of the lake. And I found the house where he starts writing the novel immediately after seeing the painting. And you remember this photo from the start of the tutorial where I said that Watson is expressing the existential angst. Um, that is infused in the novel. And then in one of my commentaries, I said that no, he was just howling at a dog. And one of the readers said, and how is howling at a dog walking by not an expression of existential angst? So I thought that was the perfect comment. Any dog walking by for Watson is an existential angst trigger. So it was amazing to be there. It was absolutely amazing to be there. I've loved this novel desperately, passionately since my 30s. And so to see the place of inception was pretty much a holy pilgrimage for me. Um, and then, of course, the cemetery. So one of you asked, what about that child, the corpse of the little baby, which appears in Hippolyte's feverish confession? Uh, Dostoevsky is coping with the impossible. He's coping with the grief of a father who lost a 3 months old baby in Geneva, and she's buried here in the cemetery in Geneva. The Dostoevsky Society still takes care of the grave. Um, and so they are finally settled. He's finally writing. Creativity is back in his mind and his soul. Anna Grigorievna is there to help him. She's taking dictation. The novel is coming along. They have a baby. It's a daughter. They name her Sonia after the transcendent character of Crime and Punishment. And Dostoevsky really feels that giving the baby the name Sonia is so important because the character of Sonia evolves so much at the end of Crime and Punishment because Anna Grigorievna comes into his life. So the transcendence of Sonia becomes so much more profound in the epilogue of Crime and Punishment because of Dostoevsky's love for this new presence in his life, the woman who illuminated his life with so much light, his new wife, Anna. So the baby dies at 3 months of age. And Dostoevsky and Dostoevsky and Anna are weeping all the time. They can't stop crying. And this necessitates the move away from Geneva. So here's the sign of the cemetery. And they moved to the other side of Lake Geneva to Vevey. And here is an image of Vevey. It's fascinating. We went to see the 1994 adaptation of Little Women with Winona Ryder at the same theater at Film Scene on Friday. And guess where Amy is learning how to become a painter in Vevey in Switzerland. So I just thought, oh, this is so exciting. I know exactly where that is. There's a statue, I didn't include it in the PowerPoint. There's a statue of Charlie Chaplin on the promenade here in Vevey because he lived in Vevey too. So definitely look out for Vevey in literature and in the arts because it's a happening place. So many people have crossed past Vevey. And this is the photo that I've taken in Vevey. So it's taken from the eastern side of Lake Geneva towards the west. And then finally, they can't be in Switzerland anymore. It reminds them of the baby. It reminds them of their loss. They end up in Florence. And this is the Pitti Palace. And across the street is literally across the street from this enormous, beautiful square of Palazzo Pitti is, and those of you who read The Three Musketeers with me remember all of my commentary on the Medicis and the marriage of Catherine de' Medici and Marie de' Medici into the royal family of France. Marie de' Medici was born in the Pitti Palace, and she is, when she is transplanted to France to become the second wife of Henry IV, the first French Bourbon king, she orders the construction of the Luxembourg Palace based on her memories of the Pitti Palace. Those of you who know my affliction for Napoleon, this is the palace where Napoleon stays every time when he is in Florence for either a short stay or an extended stay. So many associations with this palace. The Boboli Gardens were an inspiration, not just for the Luxembourg Gardens and the Gardens of Versailles, but also for Pavlovsk Gardens. So the Boboli Gardens were the garden that influence so much park culture in the world. So both formal French gardens like the Luxembourg Gardens and the Versailles Gardens, and sort of more sprawling, seemingly unstructured English gardens like Pavlovsk were both influenced by the Boboli Gardens. So the connection there is direct. So here's the inscription. This is what Dostoevsky wrote, The Idiot, from 68 to 69. I found the building. Very nice tourist took my picture in front of the building. I was pretty much in heaven. My journey was complete at this point. My idiot journey was complete. And remember, Dostoevsky mentions Raphael Madonna in The Idiot at one point. This is the Raphael Madonna that is housed at the Pitti Palace. And those of you who looked on Substack, I already posted the Dresden Madonna, another Raphael painting that is housed in Dresden in Germany, which will become the focal point of the demons. So I might actually make that image the main image of my commentary for demons. So you see the evolution of Dostoevsky's thinking, where we go from this horrific painting of dead Christ, the Holbein painting, to the Raphael Madonna in Demons. And this is a view of Boboli Gardens from Palazzo Pitti. And this is where it all came together for me when I saw those two chairs just sitting there in Boboli Gardens together, knowing that Dostoevsky and Anna Grigorievna walked through this park every day while he was writing the conclusion of The Idiot. And I just saw Pavlovsk. All I saw was Pavlovsk, the green bench, and it all just became so painful and clear and beautiful. And more images of Boboli gardens. So once again, they influence both the structured French gardens and the sprawling English gardens. This is the inception of European garden culture. Those Medicis, they knew how to spend money well. And this, of course, is a photo that I took in 2021 in St. Petersburg. This is the view from the pavilion in the Summer Gardens, which are located right next to the Mikhailovsky Castle, where Dostoevsky studied as a student. So this pavilion would have been very well known to him. And these are my photos of Pavlovsk from 2021, the beautiful Pavlovsk. And the green bench. All of the benches at Pavlovsk are green. So this is the bench that Dostoevsky goes back to in his mind, in his imagination, in his spiritual yearning to be back in Pavlovsk, back in Russia, with his culture, with his people. So now you can contextualize all of those very painful contemplations that Dostoevsky engages in The Idiot on the role of Russia in the Western world, because he is looking at what Russia represents for him and for the world from a very far shore. And this is the Pavlovsk Palace and a statue of the Emperor Paul. The Pavlovsk Palace of course, is named after him, so Pavel Pavlovsk. Paul in Russian is Pavel. And he's the only child of Catherine the Great. She's the one who gifted this palace to him. She wanted to keep him as far away from power as possible. And so he entertained himself by creating a beautiful palace and beautiful gardens that are so prominently featured in The Idiot. But the novel is finished in Florence, right? And who can be a greater representation of Florentine culture than Dante? And Dante, of course, is the greatest exile writer in history for political reasons. He has to leave Florence and he ends up living in Ravenna. That's why he writes his Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. His guide through Inferno is Virgil. The man who appears in this Delacroix painting was the laurel wreath, and the man in the red hood is Dante. So Dostoevsky is exquisitely aware of the fact that he's finishing The Idiot in the city that produced not just Dante, but also Petrarch and Boccaccio. And but Dante is the crucial writer here because the Divine Comedy is, I call it the exile's book of exile, and so is The Idiot. The Idiot is an exile's book of exile, and the introspection of Dante in the Divine Comedy translates into Dostoevsky's introspection, writing his novel, The Idiot, away from Pavlovsk, away from St. Petersburg, but about Pavlovsk, about St. Petersburg, in the city that refused Dante, but the city that without which the Divine Comedy couldn't have happened. So, so many connections. It's just all of this is happening all at once. All of these literary allusions, all of the political, theological, religious ideas are combined in the Idiot to the same extent as they are combined in Dante's Divine Comedy. And Dante basically tells us about profound and incurable darkness of the human spirit and our yearning to ascend towards the light. And that yearning to ascend towards the light is a crucial aspect of all of Dostoevsky's post-Siberia novels. So there's the sign. And we talked a little bit about all of the other mythological and literary allusions that we encounter in the Idiot. So, of course, the story of Perseus and Andromeda and the beast there in the description of Nastasia Philippovna, tethered to this little pleasure house with Totsky coming to seduce her, inflame her. She says, he came, he seduced me, he inflamed me, and he would just leave. And he appears as the monster in all of these images of Perseus and Andromeda. And everyone looks at the prince as the knight in shining armor. He's actually associated with the knight from the Pushkin poem. And both Aglaya and Nastasia Philippovna see in him a man who is not like other men, but they would like to impose their idea of heroic onto Myshkin. And that's always such a dangerous thing, to impose our ideas and our perceptions and our dreams and aspirations onto flesh and blood human beings. So here are a few more images of Perseus and Andromeda and the beast. And here's, of course, the Rubens painting. So Nastasia Philippovna as the woman who is constantly referred to as this capped creature who had to deal with a monster. And of course, Myshkin cannot be Perseus because he's a human being. He's not a mythological character. But he's also associated with Paris, the young Trojan prince, who is not raised by his mother and father because as he is born into the Trojan royal family, the mother and the father are told that he's going to bring about the destruction of Troy. And so they give away the baby to be raised by shepherds. Well, he grows up. Oh my goodness, are there shepherd illusions in The Idiot in Switzerland? Remember, Marie is accepted only by this man who is a shepherd in the mountains, and he's even cruel to her. But he realizes that Marie, who is such a crucial figure in the novel, Marie is accepted by the animals. And so the animals accepting Marie makes him feel that she has some value. Nastasia Philippovna never finds her flock in this novel, the way Marie finds acceptance and compassion from the flock and then from the reformed children to whom Myshkin talks all the time. But Myshkin is this character who grows up without women, without seeing women, just like Paris. And so he is asked to do the judgment of Paris. Madame Yupanchina says, "Tell me about my daughters." And of course, all of their names start with an A: Aglaya, Alexandra, Adelaida. And he tells her about the two older daughters. But then he says, with Aglaya, let me reserve judgment because beauty is a riddle. And then both Aglaya and Hippolyte later on misinterpret Myshkin's statement, and they say, oh, Myshkin said that beauty will save the world. But Myshkin never says that. Myshkin says about Aglaya, beauty is a riddle. And about Nastasia Philippovna, he says, she's so beautiful, but there's so much suffering in her. If only she were good, all would be saved. And of course, that's Myshkin putting a lot of burden onto Nastasia Philippovna, assuming that her goodness will transcend the suffering that she has endured. So this is a novel about characters misplacing their understanding of each other and encountering actual flesh and blood characters after their projections and finding them lacking. Welcome to real world, kids. That's life. We have projections about how people ought to be, and we are disappointed nearly 100% of the time. So Dostoevsky warns us about what is in our minds and these projections that we have and what is there in reality. And Myshkin's projection about the three sisters, of course, is prescient, but at the same time burdensome. And here are a few more images of the Judgment of Paris and the Three Beauties. Of course, Rubens painted one of the better known versions of this. Reference to Three Musketeers. You're welcome. We spent 2 summers reading Three Musketeers and the first sequel. And of course, it's Ivalgin, who's an adorable character. I should have included one more illustration here, and I forgot. Ivalgin is, of course, I mentioned that when we'll be reading Demons next fall, there'll be so many references to Shakespeare. Well, Ivalgin is, of course, an homage to Shakespeare as well. He is Falstaff. Falstaff, the larger than life, always drunk, always gregarious, always unbearable character of Henry IV, parts one and two. And then he dies in Henry V. And the Shakespeare's readers were so incensed that he deprived them of this comic relief character that he has to write Merry Wives of Windsor and reintroduce Falstaff in that play. So the Three Musketeers, of course, Porthos is um, General Ivalgin's great hero in among the Three Musketeers, but also he is based on Shakespeare's Falstaff. And then we talked about Lady of the Camellias, Alexander Dumas' son, who writes the novel of this high society courtesan who is dying of tuberculosis, and she's associated with the camellia flowers. And here's the poster for the play that was based on the novel, with Sarah Bernhardt performing the role of future Violetta from the opera. And we talked already about Madame Bovary, opened in Nastasia Filipovna's room at the end of the novel. Quixote is a constant reference in the novel, and Dostoevsky actually he writes to his niece, and in his letter to his niece, he says that I wanted to portray the perfectly beautiful human being. And his models for portraying the perfectly beautiful human being are, of course, Quixote, Jean Valjean from Les Miserables, and Christ. And this is the Christ of Andrei Rublev, the greatest Russian icon painter. And the image that we come back to over and over and over again in the novel is Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, or the Apocalypse. It's fascinating that this painting was also painted in the Russian 19th century. It's by Vasnetsov. He specialized in Russian fairy tales and Russian folklore painting. If you look online and you just say Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, this is the first image that will pop up. It's amazing how Dostoevsky and his contemporaries were concerned with the apocalypse. And as I mentioned in my first talk on The Idiot, the novel begins with a train coming into Russia from the West. And in the same train compartment, we have Myshkin, who has this meekness and compassion and pity that is so reminiscent of Christ. Rogozhin, who is the embodiment of primal darkness and primal evil. And Lebedev, who is also a charmingly buffoonish character, slightly drunk always, with the 13 children, all orphans, because his wife died, that he introduces himself as the interpreter of the apocalypse. So we have um, the human embodiment of Christian goodness in Myshkin, the human embodiment of primal darkness in Rogozhin, and Lebedev as the interpreter of the apocalypse coming into the book. There are so many books associated with trains in Russia. Anna Karenina, of course, first and foremost, but also Tolstoy's Kreutzer Sonata, which the entirety of the novella takes place on a train. Trains are referenced continuously in The Idiot. And it's fascinating then Aglaya asks Lebedev to interpret the Star of Wormwood, which is this essence of bitterness, discord, darkness in the apocalypse. And he says, well, it's the trains. It's like Star Wormwood are trains, which is such a strange statement. And he says, yeah, they bring us closer to each other. They bring things to us. And my students are always so bewildered by this. And I bring it into their world by saying, well, that's just like Amazon Prime and DoorDash. And they are like, yes, now we get it. Yes, we are satisfied physically. Amazon Prime brings these things to us the next day. DoorDash brings physical gratification to us within 30 minutes. But what about our metaphysical yearnings? What about this desire to reach transcendent understanding in our empirical form here and now? And that is the question that Dostoevsky is asking most importantly throughout The Idiot. And thus, all of these references to physical gratification, and the greatest example of that physical gratification becomes money. Everyone is concerned with money in this novel. I mean, we have two millionaires in the novel, not one, but two. So Rogozhin all of a sudden inherits a fortune of 1 million, and Mushkin is described as someone inheriting the fortune of 1 million. So when he finally proposes to Aglaya, the father has to ask the important question: "What about your finances? Can you afford to marry my daughter?" And then he says, "Well, I'm a little disappointed that you only have 100,000." It's fascinating. Then Aglaya marries this Polish revolutionary who is a count, and then it turns out he's not a revolutionary, he's not a count, and his fortune, of which he gave absolute proof, not only to Madame Yupanchina, but to Prince Sh, um, it evaporates. So it's fascinating how money and spectacular, obscene amounts of money become this Dostoevsky um, symbol of physical gratification that does not bring happiness to anyone. And Mushkin is a character who has the kindest inclinations. Everyone seeks him out. Every character in the novel seeks him out. Aglaya seeks him out, Nastasia Filipovna, Ganka, who has huge uh, conflagrations, huge arguments with Mushkin. Ganka seeks him out. Evgeny Pavlovich seeks him out. Madame Yupanchina loves talking to him. In the same paragraph, she could say, "Never come to us again. Never, ever, ever. I never want to speak to you again." And then 3 sentences later, she's hugging him and she's saying to him, "But you are the dearest man I know. You are such a dear, dear man." Um, Lebedev is always seeking him out. when when General Ivalgin has to have his soliloquy about Napoleon. Napoleon is in my background, and I didn't change it for The Idiot because we have this long passage of Ivalgin explaining to Myshkin that he was 10 years old during the Moscow invasion by the French in 1812. And he advised Napoleon to write a letter to Alexander I and asking him to apologize. And then he advised Napoleon to write a letter to Josephine, from whom he's divorced at this point. And, it's every Russian's dream come true, right? To have been there in 1812 and change the course of history. That's Pierre. Remember in War and Peace, he wants to kill Napoleon. I mean, he stays in Moscow, he puts on peasant clothes, and only Natasha can recognize him in peasant clothes. I mean, they're exiting, the Rostovs are exiting from Moscow, and Natasha, in this whole catastrophe of everyone exiting with their cows, goats, sheep, rugs, china, and she sees um, Pierre, and she shouts to him, "Pyotr Kirillovich, Pyotr Kirillovich." She recognized him in the peasant clothes. So that's the aspiration of every Russian, to have been in Moscow in 1812 and changed the course of history, prevented the burning of Moscow, prevented the French invasion. So yes, even General Ivalgin is constantly seeking out the prince. And it's such a buffoonish, ridiculous chapter. But then at the end, you realize the man is having a stroke. And I talked to people who are in the medical profession, and they're just saying the way Dostoevsky describes illness is uncanny. I talked to a student who has epilepsy, and the student said that Dostoevsky describes the pre-epileptic sensation of this exaltation and then light and darkness like no other writer, and it is so incredibly accurate. So we have all of these people: tuberculosis, epilepsy, stroke, alcoholism. I mean, Lebedev was pretty much an alcoholic. So is Ivalgin. But they are described, these moments of physical lack, of possession by illness. The way Dostoevsky describes them in The Idiot are uncanny. And well, Demons is next, and the Adolescent, Brothers Karamazov was the chapter on the Grand Inquisitor, of course, and we have our fabulous Dostoevsky. So I'll stop share. I did everything that I needed to do at this point. And if there are any questions, I would like to answer them. But I think this was a good concluding discussion because I was able to merge the images that you've seen before, but contextualize them from the point of view of the idiot. So, uh, do we have any answers at the end of this novel? Not at all. Is this completely disquieting? Those of you who have never read The Idiot, like, here's my hug, the Anna hug. I just that's all I can say. All of you need a hug. That's what I said to the viewers at Film Scene on Tuesday. Um, your souls are troubled right now. Your soul is in pain, and that's what happens. And the way Kurosawa portrays the idiot in this Japanese post-World War II adaptation is uncanny. Every character is just so perfectly portrayed by the actors. And Dragozhin, literally seeing this Japanese actor embody the essence of Ragozhin is an event in your life as a film viewer. So if there are any questions, I would love um, to address them.
I'm not sure I have a question, but I'll start. And yeah,
Mhm.
one of the things that a couple of things struck me. That one is just technical, which is how Dostoevsky plays with us as the narrator. And oh, we're inside Michigan's head and we're hearing conversations that are going on, and then we'll be, well, we don't know what he was really doing or thinking at that point. You know,
Oh,
he takes it from, you know, from a different perspective to move us along in the story. But it's like, wait a minute, you know, 10 pages ago, you knew what he was thinking.
yeah, yeah. No, I love it when the second epileptic fit happens during that scene where Mishkin discusses religion and the place of Russia in European civilization. I mean, he literally says the West expects violence from us, but perhaps they will discover that we have a Russian Christ. And
Mm.
that is totally Dostoevsky speaking. You know, he literally says the West expects from us nothing but violence, but we also have the Russian Christ. And I wish they would understand that. And then Dostoevsky says, "Oh, 2 weeks have passed, and the lives of our characters have changed completely." And all of a sudden, you're reading
Yeah.
that chapter and thinking, "Where did the narrator come from?" we we missed the narrator. So
Yeah.
those of you who read Brothers Karamazov with me, we have bewildered by the narrator. PhDs have been written about the narrator in Brothers Karamazov. Dostoevsky breaks every rule in the book. Every rule in the book. He has um, narrators who know the inner thoughts of characters, and that is just an impossibility. So, yes, we love it. And those of you who wrote comments about how unreliable every character is, welcome to Dostoevsky. Every single one of us is completely unreliable. Everything we say to each other should be taken with not just a grain of salt, but with a truckload of salt because we lie. And this is a novel about lying. It's fascinating. Ivalgin is telling Myshkin the story about he was the page of Napoleon in 1812 in Moscow, and that's an impossibility. He wasn't even alive then. And then finally Napoleon is departing because he followed Ivalgin's advice, and he says, "What can I do for you, young boyar?" And he says, "Write an inscription in my sister's album." And he says, "Don't lie." It's just like the one inscription that Napoleon does in the sister's album. He says it in French, "Don't lie, don't lie." But everyone lies. Everyone lies all the time, except for Madame Yupanchina. So if you want to know my favorite character, that's her. She has three daughters that need to be married off. How hard is that? And I'm a mother of three kids who are all of marrying age, and none of them are getting married. So at this
Well,
point in my life,
when Aglaia gets married,
yes,
he
yes,
marries this Polish count who turns out
yes.
not to be a count, not to be
Yes,
wealthy. And
yes.
it's totally
I'm
wrong.
just getting a note from someone saying that they loved Madame Yupanchina. She is the voice of Dostoevsky at the end of the novel, because at the end of the novel, we are seeing her through the eyes of Evgeny Pavlovich, who is a fascinating character. Fascinating. But she's saying, all of us abroad here, that's a lie. And she's talking about all Russians, like Anna Barker, who are abroad. And to what extent we are sort of living this strange life that we created for ourselves. But we don't fit in so many ways. That's why we wave our arms on on Zoom discussions of the idiot. This is the cross we bear. This is the penance we do for being separated from our culture and our language. And Dostoevsky expressed it so keenly that Russians removed from Russia are a catastrophe. And Madame Yupanchina says they freeze here in the winter like mice. They can't even make good bread here. But here I finally talked to a soulful man. So for her, speaking to Mishkin, devoid of reason, abroad, is the most Russian thing that she can do. Because at this point, he becomes the holy fool. He becomes Yurodivy. He becomes this person who rejects the physical to such an extent that he becomes the embodiment of the spiritual in the empirical world. And she expresses Dostoevsky, all of us Russians abroad, it's such a lie. They freeze in the winter, they don't have good bread, and the only adherence to our soulfulness that we can reach in the West is talking to a Russian holy fool, which is Mushkin. I'm going to start crying. That's it. The Zoom is over. I mean, for me, this novel is so meaningful in such a deeply spiritual way. And it's a novel that is catastrophic. I had a hard time teaching it for such a long time. And many of you have heard me say this, but I have a recording of Leonard Bernstein conducting St. Matthew's Passion of Bach. And at the end, he explains some of the incredible complexity of this musical composition. And then he says, it is so superb, it is so sublime that none of us will ever know just what is in it. And when I heard him say that, and it's Leonard Bernstein, it's as if the weight has descended off my shoulders. I sort of felt that I cannot explain these masterpieces fully because they are too complex, too enigmatic, too inexplicable, too mysterious, too sublime for any of us mere mortals to fully appreciate and understand them. And this applies to The Idiot more than any other novel I teach. And I posted the photo of my registration for the spring class where we're reading 3,000 pages of Russian literature from Eugene Onegin to The Idiot and Demons. I still have a wait list. And everybody tells me, just raise the cap. You need more than 18 students. And I keep saying, no, I won't, because I really want a soulful discussion. If you are going to have 30 students in that class, it's not going to be the same. I want this deep, introspective, beautiful discussion. We will meet 16 times for 16 weeks for 3 hours each time to have in-depth, fantastic, soulful discussion of these books that speak to us because we're human. And and they're sublime. And I gave you the reference of how if you know the plot of Carmen, it's the ending of The Idiot, except the opera Carmen was written after the publication of The Idiot. And a student actually asked me this question, and they said, Anna, that's impossible. And I'm like, but Carmen is based on a novella by Prosper Mérimée, who was such a huge fan of Pushkin. He was a French writer who loved Pushkin so much that he learned enough Russian to read Pushkin in Russian and Pushkin's The Gypsies, Цыгане. I still remember the first line. Цыгане шумною толпой по Бессарабии кочуют. It's such a beautiful poem, but it's about a man named Aleka he's dejected. He's the perfect superfluous young man. Note that superfluous young man. Do you remember we talked about superfluous young man while we were reading? I think that was a year and a half ago. We were reading Eugene Onegin of Pushkin, Hero of Our Time of Lermontov, and Bazarov is the quintessential superfluous young man in Russian literature in Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. Yevgeny Pavlovich says, I am a superfluous young man in Russia. I cannot be in Russia because I don't belong. Well, in Pushkin's The Gypsies, Aleka leaves St. Petersburg society because he feels that he doesn't belong. He wants freedom. And he goes to what was then Bessarabia, which is today Moldova and Romania, and he joins a caravan of Roma, of gypsies. And he falls in love with a young woman and they are married, but then he still yearns for something else. He's the perfect Byronic character, never satisfied. And so the ending of the gypsies is exactly like the ending of Prosper's Mary May Carmen, and then exactly like the ending of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. So the connection with Pushkin here is once again so prevalent. Pushkin's poem, about the night, is a huge part of this like teasing of Aglaya, and everyone is constantly aware that when Aglaya is referencing the night, she's talking about Mushkin, but everyone is just sort of chuckling about this connection. So Pushkin is present at the ending of The Idiot, and that connects all of the themes in this novel. The hopelessness of the idea of resurrection while looking at Holbein's Christ, the life cut short, as exemplified by the soliloquies of Hippolyte, and Aglaya um, prophesizing her own death throughout the novel because she's a character who has absolutely no sense of moving on from this internal pain that she's carrying in her, the suffering that Mushkin sees already in her portrait.
Mhm.
So much is going on in this novel, and I hope that in the past hour and a half, I was able to at least illuminate some of the aspects that would be too hard to do in these short or long posts that I make. Um, Photographs are so helpful and beautiful. Thank you. So I'm just reading the comments, and people really, really loved Madame Yapanchina. Thank you for the energy. I have energy during the last several months. Loved the journey and loved Lizaveta. Yes, she is my favorite character because she's a child. She speaks the truth. Remember when she asked about her daughters, Mushkin, tells her about her daughters, tells about Aglaya that beauty is a riddle. But then he looks at her and she says, "What about me?" And Mushkin says, "You're a child." And I love her because at one point she just says, "No, I don't ever want to talk to you again. You're despicable." And then, as I said, 3 sentences later, she says, "Oh, you're the dearest man I know. Come anytime." Um, she is going to be reincorporated into the novel The Adolescent. um, Arkady Dolgoruki, the main character, who's a teenage boy, he will have an aunt, and she will either like whack him on the head or hug him. And it continues throughout the novel because as a teenage boy, he's unbearable. And so she's just sort of like his double in that novel, who is constantly very physically letting him know whether he's on the wrong track or the right track. And at this point, we have to talk about Kolya. So, in addition to Madame Yupanchina, Kolya is the soul of the novel. The most crucially beautiful thing about him is he never criticizes his father, which is so hard to do because General Ivolgin is unbearable, but he never criticizes his father. He's there with his father to the very end. He's devastated when the father dies. And he's the one, I mean, that's what I said in my comment. Give teenage boys enough money to go and buy a history book, and they end up bargaining with a peasant for an axe because that's the next best thing to buying a history book. But in addition to the axe, they are going to purchase a hedgehog. And so they come to Aglaya, the scene where Aglaya plays chess with Mushkin and beats him, and then he plays cards with her and he beats her, and she's so upset. Those of you who have been in long-term relationship with someone, you know precisely, you know that scene, right? You know that scene. Those of you who are laughing out loud, you know that scene. But Aglaya is the light, so she sees these teenage boys. The way Aglaya and Kolya tease each other is hilarious because he just tells her that she is awful and she tells him that he's awful, and then they reconcile and she says, "I want your hedgehog." And Kolya has to reveal to her that the hedgehog is not his because the money with which they bargained for the eggs and the hedgehog belongs to the boy who needed a history book. I mean, Like, I've never seen a better description of the logic of teenage boys than in Dostoevsky. And so she purchases the hedgehog and she says to him, now take this hedgehog to Mushkin. And then, he walks around like a teenage boy swinging the seasick hedgehog in the basket. And she says, stop swinging him, just be nice. And so when the hedgehog arrives to Mushkin, Dostoevsky says he experienced the resurrection. So, what is a resurrection? It's a hedgehog in a basket. What is a resurrection? It's us opening our eyes in the morning and realizing, oh, I made it. I made it through the darkness to see the light yet again. That is the resurrection of Ippolit. He sees the light yet again. That is the resurrection of Mishkin. He gets a hedgehog in a basket. So, what is happiness, kids? Hedgehog in a basket. And I'm going to end the Zoom the way I ended my first Zoom on the idiot by saying I had these two students who were in love with Dostoevsky and they were getting married. And they were both working at Prairie Lights, the local bookstore. And so the wedding was, all the bookcases were pushed back, and the wedding happened amidst the bookcases. And then their party was in the bookstore cafe. And I knew that I could only give them one gift for their wedding present, and it's a hedgehog. And so I called every pet shop in town, but hedgehogs are wild species in Iowa, so you can't purchase a hedgehog. And so I thought, oh, it would be so stupid to get a stuffed hedgehog. It's like, that's not real. So I did the next best thing. I purchased a pot, filled it with soil, put an onion in it, and gave them an onion, Brothers Karamazov. Um, it's just this amazing, amazing conversation that Grushenka and Alyosha Karamazov have. And Grushenka says to Alyosha, Alyosha says, I didn't do anything. I gave you nothing. And she says, you gave me an onion. That's what. And so imagine everyone looking at this strange woman with a pot and an onion, and all three of us weeping over it at their wedding reception. So yes, hedgehogs are very, very special. So what is resurrection? A hedgehog in a basket. And I'm going to start weeping over this too, because hedgehogs are very special for me. They're such darling little creatures. Any more questions? All right, we are done, kids. So brush up your knowledge of 18th century revolutionary upheavals. And for the next 2.5 months, I'm going to just post books that I'm reading. And I have mountains. I need to like clear my shelf space to accommodate all of the new books that I have. But this week, I'm going to post those three: The Blazing World about 17th century English history. I mean, word of warning, you will be sick to your stomach when you'll be reading that book. If you choose to read that book, you will find out things about human beings that you do not want to know. And then biography of Cromwell, which will drive you to madness. And then biography of Milton, which will put Paradise Lost into such superb and catastrophic background that you will look at Paradise Lost, and of course we read it together. Those of you who have known me in 2020, we read that together. So I'm going to write about to what extent the English Civil War, the beheading of the King Charles I, the time of Cromwell, and the Restoration, and all the way to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 influenced the American Revolution, because American Revolution did not emerge out of a vacuum. It emerged out of this whole age of revolutionary upheavals that was with us for about 300 years. So brace yourselves. We are going to the barricades. This was so much fun. Excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you for reading The Idiot and finishing the novel. Next, Demons, and then Adolescent, and then Brothers Karamazov, and we are going to have a glorious, glorious time going through all of Dostoevsky. And if you're wondering what's happening in 28, Tolstoy's 200. So there.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.